Reverend Jackson, take one. Mark.
Actually, in 1960, I was arrested with 7 classmates trying to use a public library. We began to protest. That was a season of resistance of racial segregation. At Greensboro, North Carolina, I was president of student body at North Carolina A&T in Moore Jail. And so I was inclined to either go to Duke University Graduate School or UNC Law School. My president, Dr. Proctor, said, if you go to either of those schools, you will be under so much pressure to remain involved. Step away for a while and study and try seminary. So I came to Chicago Seminary in 1964. And I soon found my rhythm. This was my place to be in seminary. And that's how I got here. It was interesting, the sitting in the public library is a political act. We didn't see it as such. Marching in the South was a political act. We did not see it as such. But by the time I got to Chicago in 1964, it was apparent that we were on the cusp of getting the right to vote. That was going to be our lever in the future. In slavery time, in the Old Testament, it said they had to make brick without straw. We had to make democracy without the right to vote. And so the vote became a new lever for us in 1965. And so I used that lever for voter registration in 1972 when we were trying to democratize the Democratic Party. Mayor Daley would not accept the new formation. We Bill Singer and I led a delegation, and we sat in Miami, Florida, and we defeated the Daley delegation at the time. And so we got our seats in. We were with the Mississippi Democratic Party and John Conyers and Willie Brown and that generation of freedom fighters. And so, but I did not see for myself being involved politically as a politician. I was an organizer, street organizer. In 83, I was on a radio show one Sunday morning, and someone called in and said, Jane Burns about to have a coronation. You guys should protest and boycott Chicago Fest. I said, you can't do that. After they got Stevie Wonder coming, and OJ's and Odetta, and free beer and popcorn and peanuts and hot dogs. You can't boycott that. My mind said that. My spirit said, but if he's right, he can't be wrong. So we met here on Wednesday. We said enough is enough, and we began to organize the boycott Chicago Fest. My job was to get the artists not to cross our picket line. Stevie Wonder took the leadership in that. He signed the contract. He defied the contract, willing to take the hit. But while we were in that campaign to get Harold Washington elected as mayor, we heard that Ted Kennedy and Monday would come to Chicago to support Jane Byrne and Daley. No, this is a primary. I mean, Jane Byrne and Daley over Harold. And so we sent a telegram, if you will, to say, please don't come in. They said, in effect, these are our friends. We have to come in. What are we? We'd always seen them as our liberal allies in the process. And so I said, somebody black should run against them in the primary. And I asked Maynard Jackson. Maynard said I would run, so it should happen. I've just finished my public service. I make some money for my family. I built an economic institution. And they wouldn't do it. So I kept raising the question, and finally somebody said in our rural registration, run just to run. So I got involved as a protest, really, resisting how liberals were taking us for granted and dismissing us and marginalizing us in the process. And so one thing led to another. When we were fighting to desegregate schools, Ted Kendall's vis-a-vis Ed Brooke. He's on the wrong side, then call him the wrong side of that struggle. It was the thing that liberals had assumed that we had such limitations and that they didn't have to deal with us from a power point of view. I felt that we had the right to run and the reason to run and the capacity to take our case to the next level. And that's kind of why I got involved in '84. We learned a lot. determined with Maxine Waters and Dick Hatcher and others of us, Carl Stokes, Percy Sutton, that if we ran, we would have to run on a ticket broad enough to be inclusive, a rainbow coalition, multiracial, multicultural coalition. It couldn't be narrowly conceived, and we were told, don't run the hour's too white, you know. If we get double digits an hour, it shows that we are valid. So when we ran an hour, we ran out there milking cows and with family farm. We learned a lot in an hour. We went to New Hampshire, you know. There are many poor people in New Hampshire as in Mississippi, cold and poor. But we would be building alliances all along the way. And then come Super Tuesday, we had developed momentum, and so we began to win. We won South Carolina and Louisiana and Mississippi. We began to feel the taste of victory. I remember one night we were in New Hampshire, and one of the leaders said, "Reverend, you've done pretty well so far, but you know, tomorrow we're discussing foreign policies. If you don't want to be there, it's all right." He was kind of patronizing. We're discussing foreign policy. I said, "I look forward." He said, "I said we came here for foreign. Slavery was a foreign policy, so I had a global view, and he had a nationalistic view. I looked at the world in a global sense. He looked at me in the racial limitations. So breaking through racial limitations and assumptions during that season, and the headwinds of the press being dismissive of us and the violent threats, all that was a big part of the 84 campaign. Racism in the sense of the downright threats. I remember one time I went to see Bill Cosby's mother, who was sick in the hospital in LA. And I saw two guys crying, embracing each other. After visiting Bill Cosby's mother, one time I said, "Reverend, will you pray for my wife? She's in a coma." I said, "Yes, sir." She said, "But she's Jewish." I said, "I'll pray for her, pray with her." Went down to the room and she said, "She's a big fan of yours." So she looked up and saw me, and she never went back. She snapped out of it. She never. It was miraculous. And yet, New York Times had this. They're selling that story the day after the 84 campaign. They're selling the story, for example. And someone asked me at the end of the campaign, how did I feel? I said it was kind of like one day, Jesse Jackson was out on a boat with the Pope. They were talking religious talk, and the strong wind blew and blew the Pope's holy hat off. And he reached for it and couldn't get it. The pole, couldn't get it. And so I walked on the water. I got it. The headline, Jesse Jackson can't swim. So no matter what we did at that time, there were certain assumptions about our limitations. For the first time, we had African American journalists on the campaign. It wasn't always the case that you'd have black journalists on these campaigns. So many of them, George Curry, many got their first shot at national campaigns in '84. We learned a lot. There's a lot of growing up all the way around. Dr. King was killed in '68. We had a big convention in 1971, the Black Convention in Gary, Indiana. And Dick Hatcher and Carl Stokes and Percy Sutton, we were discussing somebody should consider running, someone should consider running. She'll announce in New York, she was Belle Absolute, she's kind of with the women's movement. We tried to convince her to come to the Black political convention. She wouldn't come to the convention, which was a big thing because she didn't want to be seen as the black candidate, but a more women's candidate. So I knew her as a candidate, as a congresswoman, an utterly brilliant woman with tremendous courage. And so her run was a breakthrough, and it laid the groundwork in substance for my run in '84. In '88, it laid the groundwork for '08. Well, when Dr. King was killed, some reacted with applause. So the FBI agents jumped on the desk and applauded in Atlanta, Georgia, the report is. Some reacted with riots, and others passed resolution named streets after him. John Conyers, congressman at that time, said it should be King Holiday. He was looked at as he was absurd. After all, Dr. King was 55% in negative among blacks, because of the Vietnam War position and leaders attacking him broadside. 72% negative among whites, just reacting to what he stood for as racial justice. And so that was an ugly season of and so John Conscious, every January 15th, we'd go out by the Lincoln Memorial and protest. And at some point in time, with the hostility that the Reagan represented really toward our movement, Stevie Wonder captured the spirit of that protest, turned to a song, Happy Birthday, Martin Luther King. And he gave music and meaning to the holiday. It took off and became a cultural phenomenon. So something it was kind of cheap for Reagan to do it as a gesture, but he did it because the sum total of our King holiday and 84 run, all that was a part of the spirit of that time. The rationale was if you have a King holiday, it would be too expensive to have it. Once you're under this guy, they were attacking, even to the grade of attacking him, his morals, even to the grade of attacking Dr. King. He didn't deserve it. But we demanded it, and it became a transcendent note. And now, of course, we've gone from the King protests to the legislation, to the holiday, to the memorial in Washington. But that has its roots really in his assassination and in the role that Congressman John Conyers played in making it legislative, and then Stevie Wonder added the cultural phenomena. Music is so important to this because I remember Dr. King was in his anti-war speeches, meaning stiff resistance. I mean, he was being attacked all over the place, and churches half full, he couldn't get an audience. And Marvin Gaye did What's Going On. And somehow he gave meaning through music. So Marvin Gaye became to the anti-war protests. But Stevie Wonder became to the King holiday, one whose music and power of music took everybody to another level. Our base was black churches and music, and artists supported us. And their support was meaningful to us. And that some expectations had been built since '84. We could command presence on the stage. I tried to figure out what 2 or 3 angles could I take that would give us a track of change. So it says Free Mandela. Neither party wanted to touch Mandela because America was allied with South Africa. South Africa was our ally. We saw the Cape as where the Indian and Atlantic Oceans come together as a trade route we couldn't trust with the blacks of South Africa. Free Mandela became one of my battle cries. The drugs in the high schools. It was seen as a not so relevant issue. It was. I would go to high schools and speak. 18-year-olds are eligible to register and vote. So we were getting votes out of the high schools. That became a big piece of our work. And we had laid the groundwork. The Middle East, we said let's be less talk as opposed to a no-talk policy. How can you resolve a conflict unless you talk? That was controversial, but it was critical. And the day that Clinton signed the bill for the Palestinian state, I was there watching people cry, but we had taken the hits. A less talk policy for the Middle East, Free Mandela, the drug flow, a comprehensive health care plan, Medicare for all. We took these kind of tough positions, which the press called liberal. They really were the moral center. Free Mandela was not left, it was moral center. A two-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis coexist is a moral center position, really. Stop the drug flow, drugs in, guns in, jobs out. We had to break that cycle, you know? So these positions we took was, we laid the groundwork. And there was a certain readiness in '88 that didn't exist in '84. So we did well. I think we beat Mondale and Gore, I think, in Iowa. That was dismissive of that. We kept on growing. And of course, when we won Michigan, that got everybody's attention. This thing was for real. It was clear to me, and we got 1,200 delegates at $19 million. If we'd had $40 million, we could have won the campaign in '88, really. But we laid the groundwork for somebody in the future to come along, to seize that stage and take this to a logical conclusion. I remember President Barack Obama one time, we were talking downtown here, we were debating Hart and Mondale. And the press said I did well, they gave me high marks the next day. He said, he saw the debate and said, this thing can happen. And if in our sowing seeds, some seeds hit the rock, some hit the air, some hit germinate, if the seed was sown for him at Columbia University, it was worth it all. Jesus in the parable of the sower, so you sow seeds, rock, wind, soil. And if that was a part of his inspiration, it's gratifying to me. Our struggle is built upon the landmarks of the time. I mean, with the 54 decision, the legal decision won by Thurgood Marshall and Constance Becker Motley in that group, laid the groundwork for Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was protesting legal segregation, testing the 54 decision, which the boycott was won in 55, but we won a legal decision in 56. Dr. King emerged out of that. So in some sense, Dr. King's struggle for the right to vote in 65, had Dick Hatcher and Carl Stokes came out of that. And so each generation's contribution lays the groundwork for the next generation, and it must be seized. I asked Mrs. Parks, I said, Mrs. Parks, why didn't you go to the back of the bus? You could have been hurt. You could have been thrown under the bus, brutalized. She said, I wanted to go back. I thought by Emmett Till I couldn't go back. Emmett Till, August 28, 1955, lynched. Rosa Parks set them December 1st, 1955. August 28th, Dr. King's speeches in Washington, March on Washington. August 28th, Barack Obama declared the win in Denver, Colorado. August 28th had the sun ring to me. It started raining. And so I look at the 54 decision, laid the predicate for the 64 Civil Rights Act, predicate for Voting Rights Act 65, predicate for the Fair Housing Act, and said you can almost follow, we live in our faith, we live under the law. The legal victories accumulated, and the result was this brilliant, ingenious politician. Santita, my daughter, and Michelle were close friends. And they studied together. They were kind of soulmates. And when she was dating Barack, they were talking girl talk together. So, and in our household, Jesse, who became very close friends with President Barack Obama, yeah, he's the guy to watch. He got something special. He has that special X factor. And he did have the X factor. He was working at some foundations downtown and some legal work downtown, community organizing, but I probably identified him early on as having the it factor. I knew him through my children. Then I met him, and I detected, as they did, he had the it factor. She is such a strong and smart person. We've never had a first lady more qualified, more able, a bigger contributor than Michelle Robinson Obama. Well, many people who did not know President Barack Obama, and he did not know many people after he grew up in Hawaii, not on the mainland. But people identified with Michelle and she had the ability to speak. But in some sense, that whole White House phenomenon around their family was like they're going to kill the firstborn babies in the Old Testament. Moses' mother figured out a way to get Moses and his sister into the king's household, into Pharaoh's household. So Moses' mother raised Moses and his sister in the big house. To see Mrs. Robinson raise their children in the big house, to me was quite biblical. They brought us lots of hope, lots of joy, lots of pleasure, and no scandal. So there's something utterly purifying about the children in the White House with their grandmother and with their parents doing so well. They set the pace for a model of family leadership for all time. He clearly had the capacity to reach beyond limits beyond one side of town, rural and urban and suburban. Like he had a rainbow vision in his mind's eye. And of course, so able as a writer and as a thinker. One time we were downtown at a peace rally. People, everybody were anti-war, 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 anti-war. Brock said, I'm not against all wars. It's a peace rally. Said the war to end slavery, to save the Union, I'd have been a part of that war. The war to end Nazi Germany, I'd have been in that war. The fact he was thinking in that way at a peace rally and said, I'm not against all wars, was like, what are you talking about? Because it's so anti-war. He said, no, there's some wars you have to fight, ending slavery and saving the Union. In the Nazi Germany, it was the wars worth fighting. So he had that sense of audacity and vision. And the young came out of our struggle and became a congressman, and then UN leader, and Walter Fonsford came out of our organization, so that in some sense politics was the next step. You know, the 4 stages in our struggle, 4 stages. The first stage is to end legal slavery. 246 years, about 246, end slavery. The next stage was to end legal Jim Crow. 5,000 blacks were lynched without any sense of protection from terror. Third stage is access to voting. Stage. Beyond voting, access to capital, industry, and technology, and deal flow. So in the stage of political empowerment comes these possibilities of people who come out. Because if you can't use a public toilet, you're not discussing running for mayor. They're not the candidate speech in Washington. The reason why it resonated in a certain kind of way. From Texas to Florida to Maryland, we could use a single public toilet. We'd have to go behind cans and alleys, behind trees, and ask people not to look. It was basic indignity. And the women going behind the trees that don't look. Men using don't look. I mean, there was humiliation. So you kind of learn to drive the route where you didn't stop at small restaurants. You stopped by friends' houses, or churches, or roadsides. It was that kind of navigating life. So we couldn't use the toilet. Money was a counterfeit. You couldn't buy ice cream at Howard Johnson. You couldn't rent a room at Holiday Inn. You couldn't sit in the Woolworths across the South. Live in abject humility. I dream of a day when this will not be. And he kept expanding from that dream. And so one could never be at that march talking about, I want to be the mayor and didn't have a right to vote. I want to be the congressman and didn't have the right to vote. So that in the stage of political emancipation, emerged a whole generation of young activists who had various levels of aspirations. 50 years ago was a different. Dr. King never saw a cell phone. Mm-hmm. He never saw an African American mayor in Atlanta or New Orleans. Not to mention his staff member, Andy Young, and one folks were going to Congress. He could not imagine 55 blacks in the Congress today. African American senators, 4 of them, and the U.S. president, African American. All this taking place within the 50-year span, an explosion of opportunities, possibly in the last 50 years. I knew Bobby, and when Bobby was a young Panther, Panthers in the lineage of stop and frisk and driving while black and Black Lives Matter. The Panthers were in that lineage. They have states for young blacks protesting against police brutality, and Bob was a part of that. And his friend Fred Hampton was killed. They were trying to kill Bobby and Fred and Mark Clark. And Bobby was at home that night, and his friends were killed. He called me at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, Reverend, I'm a fugitive from the law. Can I turn myself in to you on Saturday morning meeting? A very public space, we did. So we became very tight. But to me, some of this is a normal course of after all. When Bobby ran against Charlie Hayes, a lifelong political labor leader, maybe you thought Bobby should run. He won. That's politics, you know. So Barack running was his right to run and to learn the sphere. He lost, but Bobby ran. He ran. So I think many of these, we get our stars from our scars. We have to be mature enough to take these hits without letting the hits linger. You cannot play with pain for so long and play and fully function. I think Barack did a good thing by running. He learned a lot. They say he ran for U.S. Senate, had nothing to do with Congress, then the president. So he was not a perpetual Bobby Rush candidate. He just happened one time. Barack was a nexus. He was a connector. He was a bridge builder. He took the risk to see if whites would follow somebody who made sense and not limit them based upon race. He took the risk and paid off for him. Of course, he swept Cook County for the first time, and so his race was a magnificent race. It set the stage for many other races around the nation, frankly. It's hard to describe. It was lots of joy to me watching him on the big stage. And I remember watching him from my living room, sitting down, smoking a cigarette, and talk with my boys to become a U.S. Senator, to hit the big stage. I knew he would do well because he had the right stuff to get factor. Barack is extremely intelligent, literate, a writer, a thinker. And he was just a stage away from greatness, and he got the stage and seized it and kept on stepping. In 2000 was he said about America's not, it's red, white, and blue America. It was aspiration. He was trying to use that platform to make his case. I think we cannot be oversensitive and insensitive to his navigation to get to the end zone. So then he had to reverse the field. So he's running backwards now. He has a lot of positioning in what he had to do. From the time that they tried to use Jeremiah Wright to defeat him, to Crowley and Bill Gates, to denying him a Supreme Court nominee, they never stopped trying to diminish him. So every day was the day of negotiations, and we who support him have to understand the navigation. And I understand it a lot because having run, I know the subtleties involved. I remember I was running in Iowa in '84. We were packing schoolhouses. I don't know where they're coming because I was a novelty to them, or speaking or whatever. And two white guys came out, and their grandchildren, they had the Gallus overhauls. I said, Reverend, should we speak to him? I said, yes. The Reverend said, these two guys, maybe 60, their grandchildren, they said, we heard you tonight. We're not quite there yet. Don't give up on us. Their grandchildren were ready 20 years later. I mean, you gotta look at my face. That you make sense to me. We're not quite there. What he really said, we cannot go to a caucus and argue your case against our neighbors, but don't give up. So we always had that kind of mixed arrangement. My son Jesse Jr. Was his co-chair. And so we immediately endorsed him for president because he was a live option. It was a long shot. An African American runner was a long shot. He took the long shot, and I could not very well have benefited the way I did in '84 and '88. And I supported him in that lineage of struggle. And he had the time was right, you know. He didn't start the struggle. He benefited from it. He didn't cause it. He's a result of it. 50 years of public accommodations and the right to vote and fair housing and women's organization, women's rights and civil rights and gay rights. 50 years of that work resulted in '08. Barack lives 6 houses from where we are right now. He lives right around the corner. We've been meeting here every Saturday morning since 1966. Barack would come around almost every Saturday and speak. He was blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh, spirit of my spirit. He was ours. We belonged to us, and to watch him grow and once we learned to pronounce his name, it was all a part of our growing up together. And so, to me, it was a simple decision to support him. We're sensitive to candidates who run, who don't take into account the ethnic history of our people. Barack was sensitive, however, in his run to not get caught up in highly emotional, charged black issues. He had a bigger vision. I mean, he was insensitive. It just meant he had to project it differently. Let me give you an example. When he became president, and this guy Crowley went to Dr. Gates' house, arrested him in Boston, which is a terrible thing for Crowley to have done. Barack said, let's straight beer, it's silly. The press act is if he'd done something as hideous as Trump's behavior. I mean, he said, why should we let every issue become a national issue? This January 6th, a big issue, with Crowley and Gates, a big issue. But put these in perspective and let's move the big picture. So I saw him as struggling with moving the big picture. And I wanted him to be careful, the fact that we were all aware of the fact that blacks cannot be sacrificed in coalition politics. Every time somebody runs, they want to prove they're tough. Either attack blacks or ignore blacks. I mean, so Kennedy, his credentials, he challenges Ed Brooke, and Ed Brooke loses. You have Biden in the 94 crime bill, tough on crime, and always some reason use blacks as scapegoat. So I was sensitive to that, and I went to see with the January 6th and one of those young men is a lawyer now, by the way. But the stakes are too high to try to pin him down to an issue and a demonstration. This picture must be, we'll see Barack out of through a door, not through a keyhole. So the keyhole, you see, he's a big picture guy. I was in Venezuela with Hugo Chavez, trying to expand that relationship. He saw the hurricane. He said, Reverend, this is the big one. It was going toward New Orleans. Because of that, here's an oil company that got to help people before American government did, Chavez did. And so people were there on the rooftops and the press was saying, the refugees, these are citizens. I mean, the press was saying, so where the press conference, these are not refugees, they're citizens. And so, and the fact that George Bush flew over it a bit late, and the president's indifference to it seemed, amplified the fact that this was how we treat black people. After all, New Orleans is one of the slave ports as well. So the treatment of black people in crisis is epitomized in a big way by Katrina. Brilliant preacher. Many of our first movements toward creative preaching, Reverend Wright, when AIDS became an issue. His church took leadership on fighting AIDS. When Magic Johnson said he had HIV/AIDS, and other NBA players ran from him because we were afraid of AIDS. Reverend Wright was right on that issue, you know. Free South Africa. He had signs in front of his church, Free South Africa. He was on top of that issue. And that's why Barack, I remember that church, used to take his tapes in school and learn from his tapes. A free-thinking, free-willing black preacher. And I think that, unfortunately, in the political campaign, people always looking for something to exaggerate, you know. You say, goddamn America. He was saying, God condemn America. He was saying, you will reap what we sow. I mean, Jefferson said, the thing about God is just, enslaved, I tremble for my country. That was his way of saying that. Dr. King said America's the most violent nation on earth. It was his way of saying that. And Reverend Wright, his way of saying it was America should be condemned, should be damned for its behavior toward other people. And so they tried to make him the boogeyman, but that's unfair, because he is a solid preacher, a good guy. I have a great appreciation for Reverend Wright, his ministry, and how he has been reduced to a snippet and a soundbite. He is much more than that. President Barack learned progressive pastor and church from Reverend Wright. He was a member of that church. He said he was in Harvard, he would get Reverend Wright's tapes and play them in the dormitory. Reverend Wright was that kind of enlightened, sophisticated, progressive, real trained minister, cutting edge minister. I look back at some of the things Dr. King said. If you sit him in the middle of a campaign, they tore him apart. I mean, Dr. King, his analysis of racism and bigotry, his analysis, America's the most violent nation on earth, and things that Dr. King said in the political campaign would have been exploitable. But Jeremiah Wright deserves a lot of respect. I understood what they were doing, because they were going to try to bring him down. He's trying to weld President Reverend Wright onto him, and he had to. It was a difficult decision to make. To distance himself from his pastor was a lot to do. He made a political choice. And in '84, when I was running, they tried to weld Farrakhan onto me. We were friends, but to make him my surrogate, to make him more than what he was to me was unfair. But they were looking for something, and the president, and in the case of Reverend Wright, they found that something. Many people loved him. In many ways, to say, no matter what the press says, you're our guy. I'm in that school of thought. He's my guy. I was in India, giving a Gandhi lecture. I got a call from President Barack Obama, at that time candidate, saying that they're trying to race bait and separate us. That Bill Clinton is trying to say, even you on this, it's not an important deal. It's no big deal. And I said, be composed. Don't overreact. We talked about it. We had prayer. 10 minutes I got a call from Bill Clinton and his congressman from New York. Bill Clinton didn't mean that. That's not what Bill Clinton meant. So anyway, we did win South Carolina. And he was trying to diminish Barack's strength in South Carolina. It didn't work, but he certainly tried it. I regret it so much because I wish I could have served him more, frankly, more directly. I supported him directly, but as a member of his inner circle. He had spoken to the church on Sunday and dealing with black men's behavior, as opposed to policies that lend themselves to our behavior. We work hardest, we make the least money. We live we're processed differently. We work hard to make less, live on discretion, don't live as long. I mean, the black men, we fill up the jails and the like. So to give a speech challenging black men's behavior cut me kind of deep. And it was all right, but the next one I was on the radio show downtown. and two right-wing radio hosts said, President Barack said about you guys yesterday. So I should have been able to shake it off easier. I was talking to him and I said, well, we want to take Barack to the woodshed on this one. That was not meant to be a lasting philosophical, political position. I mean, after all, in politics, you agree to disagree. And I never stopped supporting him. And he had to do what he had to do. I supported him. I'm sure Reverend Wright voted for him too. It was a very sensitive season. It was the moment, the movement, and the mission all came together. I looked at him walk on that stage, and we were near Johnson Publishing Company, where we had been tear gassed in '68. Dr. King was killed in '68. On that spot where we were dodging canisters, tear gas, we stood in the wide open air, one of Barack Obama. Man, to my mind came the martyrs. Where's Dr. King, Rosa Parks, really and then I wish Dr. King, McGivers, for a moment, just God give them 15 seconds to look at their work. This is their work. He was a result of our work. And so I thought about the martyrs, those who marched on the bridge in Selma that Sunday, who couldn't afford to come to Chicago, who may have been injured. After all, our warriors in America fighting for civil rights in America, we're soldiers too. Fighting for freedom in America is risky, it's very dangerous. And those who made it possible were not there. Those are very high price. I was standing in a very high price section. And so it was the moment, the movement, and it came upon me, and I was trying to hide behind someone's head. Tears been in flow. It was such a moment of joy. The prayers of the righteous have been fulfilled. Scripture we often use, I once was young, now I'm old, I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor the seed beg. I once was young, now I'm old, I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor the seed beg for bread. The righteous had come to the front. I mean, after '08, it's 53 years, 65. In 1965, the right to vote now. 65, blacks couldn't vote. White women couldn't serve on juries in the South. 18-year-olds couldn't vote. You couldn't vote by name, you couldn't vote on college campuses. And so in many ways, on August 6, 1965, a new majority was born that night. It was not just for blacks only, a new America was born that night. So it matured, the flower blossomed in '08. He had the right stuff. Of course, maybe one contribution we made to that was the rules. When he won, the whole world, the hope was the word of the globe. I mean, people said, can a black run prominence in Britain? Blacks became a Supreme Court justice in France. Blacks in small towns in Europe became council people and all that. It was a transformative moment, you see. Barack is one of the 5 great presidents of our country. Not just what he did, but the headwind he did it against. That's what most people don't take into account. If I ran a race and I ran a record-breaking race, they'd say, what was the win factor? There's a tailwind. They say he's not valid because tailwind pushed him. Headwinds don't matter. Tailwinds do. When Barack ran and won, he carried the ball for a touchdown. And many blockers along the way, but he took it in for the touchdown. And what a race he won. He was smart. He played a lot of forces together. The coalition came together and he won. When he won, we all won. if you run on the rules, I ran on the winner take all. Winner take all. If I get 48, somebody else gets 49, they take all the delegates. In 08, Hillary won. At the end, she began to serve. She won California, Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. On the 84 rule, she would have been the winner. But we democratized democracy with proportionality. So though he lost, he kept winning. And so we were part, and I'm convinced the rules of 88, big factor in 08. Many attribute his winning to social media and all that. He had social media, but he still lost California, Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. So social media notwithstanding, without proportionality, he couldn't have won. So the 88 campaign was the factor in the rules that made that victory possible that night. But my joy was, frankly, the martyrs. I felt I was representing them. 84, Randall Hammond, Mississippi Democratic Party, 64 in Lansing, New Jersey. Those who marched in the clock for the Poor People's Campaign, and Dr. King on the balcony in Memphis, all that stuff came upon me. It just kind of was a great moment of high joy, but not just for me, for the whole world. It goes with the territory. His way of name calling, after all. Trump attacked a journalist who was physically challenged and mocked him. He said a Mexican judge could not dispense, a federal judge could not dispense justice. He equated the Nazis in Charlottesville with the freedom fighters, so that it didn't, he's been attacked in that way by Trump. Unfortunate, but it's part of the territory. He had by far the biggest gathering for a nomination for a swearing-in ever in Washington. Well, the thrones, by the millions, the whole world was watching. They met and said, we'll fight him, we'll stop him, we'll just say no. And the racist campaign against Barack was not subtle to me. I think sometimes he missed some of the right fights. For example, his signature legislation was affordable health care. It's not affordable, it's Obamacare. Well, that was racializing it. And the media, Obamacare, the Obamacare didn't fight as racial because he was trying to avoid racial fights, frankly. It was a fight worth fighting. I talked to people last year in South Carolina during the campaign. My mother was in the hospital dying. She was very sick. I was going to the hospital quite often. A woman came, she said, Reverend, my father's upstairs. He's quite sick. And my husband, he has an amputation. Will you pray for them? I said, I'd be glad. I'll pray for them. I don't want to pray for them. I'll go upstairs and visit. No, don't visit them. Just pray for them. She didn't want me close to them. I said, well, how are you paying for it? She said, well, Jesse, let me tell you, I'm with affordable health care. Ain't no Obamacare, affordable health care. The one affordable health care, not Obamacare, is one of the omelet without the eggs. America they racialized. They didn't make the Voting Rights Act the Johnson Act or the King Act. It was the Voting Rights Act of '65. The Affordable Health Care Act was a signature piece that 26 million people, many of whom would have died, got health care for the first time. That's a big deal. It was racialized. He came in office, 800,000 jobs had been lost a month before. On him, his net gained jobs every month for 8 years. Big deal. Automotive industry collapsed. He took the risk of making a loan. It paid off. They paid back. We were number one again in the world. The Climate Act, the Nuclear Act in Paris. I mean, against the odds, even putting up in a civilized, decent Supreme Court justice, and they sat on it. They killed the courts. So the racial attacks on Barack were just that. He ran against a tremendous headwind of violence of people. And he faced every day the most threats have been by the whoever ran. The most threats while he was in president. The most resistance to a good sense. I mean, after all, a nuclear deal, anti-nuclear deal with Iran involved was a big deal. The climate change conference, a big deal. American leadership. Bailing our economy out, a real deep hole. 8 years in the plus zone, a big deal. No shame, no embarrassment. The whole world took lead from our president. We should never forget that. You become immune to certain attacks. You have to develop a tough skin. That's why you cannot be tender-headed and tough-hearted. You have to have a tough heart, tough mind, and a tender heart to run. And part of a black man living in America is to be able to cope with racial attacks. Some subtle and some very overt. And Barack has learned to cope with them. And most of us who survived have. Yes, it was hard because every time he did it, the press would jump in and amplify it as if it were speaking off base. He was speaking on base. The things Bill Clinton can say, Barack can't say as well. If Barack had put forth the Johnson plan for the war on poverty, Democrats should not miss this lesson. Lyndon Johnson, if he had gone to Harlem, Adam Powell, he would have a war on poverty and he'll have a black baby in his arms. He'd been dismissed as just liberal. He opened up the war on poverty in Appalachia, University of Ohio in Athens. He whitened the face of poverty. He took away the race bait. He took poverty rights to the poorest people in America, hard working Appalachian coal miners and chemical workers. He was that smart. Lyndon Johnson. The war on poverty was open. Poverty did go to Appalachia, but Lyndon opened up the war on poverty in Athens, and he traveled for a couple of days. I tried to get Kerry and Hillary to do it really, because the biggest body of poor people in America are whites in Appalachia. Hard workers, at-risk workers, chemical workers, coal miners, tough terrain, and yet they matter so much. Their needs, their human needs matter so very much. And so Robert was sensitive to those people, but he took every day was a hit. That's Barack, it's him. I mean, I'm convinced that we lost a lot of legislative seats under Barack. It had been a massive whispering campaign. It wasn't based upon his actions. It wasn't anti-Barack based upon the climate change agreement in Paris. It wasn't anti-Barack based upon the nuclear deal in Athens. It wasn't based upon the automotive industry. It was based upon reconnecting Cuba to our hemisphere. It wasn't based upon his bailing out the banks and they become solvent again. So objectively, it wasn't based upon 26 million Americans, more white than black, getting health care for the first time. It wasn't based upon that. So you really look at the resistance to him, the subtext is race in a big way. Raw, many fears, many wounds about race. And the race take over. The fact of the matter is, most people in America are white, female, or young. The gap used to be a horizontal gap, black, white, and it's a vertical gap, have-nots. Even Trump, the top 1% got a $1 trillion deal. People pick up the Trump base. Trump has 4 bases. Those are the rallies wearing the Make America Great Again. They get race bait. The tree not a tax cut for the very wealthy. That's his base. The Fox News - internet crowd, a frightened, intimidated Congress. They will take anything, including treason. So he has captured a lot of America. And President Barack, unfortunately, triggered some of those fears, and then there was his being. Well, they want to kill Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., nonviolent preacher, preaching love, shot him down in cold blood. So when you're in the lion's den, you don't have to be guilty to be devoured by the lion. What I'm amazed at is that in spite of Trump's losing and winning, and he lost by 3 million votes. So the electoral college is a whole of them slave legislation. Don't stop. Jones victory in Alabama in 2017. Don't give up. Black women rose up in a big way in Alabama. Don't give up. Keep your hope alive. The swimming from London to France, the 30-mile English Channel, it's not the 30-mile length, it's the undercurrent that makes the difference. So the undercurrent of justice. We live in our faith, we live in our faith, we live under the law, but people of faith must keep fighting and never give up. It gets dark sometimes, but the morning cometh. When the morning cometh, the darkness cannot prevail. I think about Trump sometimes. I think about Dr. King just talking about going around a mountain. Keep walking and you don't see it's dark, but keep walking. You're around, you see more of it because you're higher. So this is a dark season, but we work in the darkness like we work in the light. We can work at night. We can vote at night. We can study at night. We can think at night. We can pray at night. So it's nighttime in America. But the morning cometh. You have to look at the brighter side. You know, when I see Clemson playing Alabama in the big football game, I grew up 30 miles from Clemson. I couldn't apply to Clemson when I graduated high school in '59. I began with it the next year with federal protection. Alabama couldn't recruit me and my generation of ball players. The Renew said to take this. Now when I see Alabama playing in the big football game, I see banning being overcome. Black quarterback, Clemson. Top NFL black quarterbacks now, Black, Lamar Jackson and Holmes and Watson, Cam Newton. But now, on a given Saturday afternoon, I see these athletics, whites and blacks, 100,000, Alabama plays LSU. Skin color, not uniform color, direction, not complexion. I see growth. I was when Jones won in Alabama. I was close to did he win Tuscaloosa when he was for Alabama. He won that county. So also Mercedes-Benz is there. And he also won the county down where Auburn is, where the Honda plant is. So one sees these breakthroughs of light. I'm not going to let these episodes of darkness and meanness distract me from the victories that we've realized. South Carolina is our #1 in tire production. The walls came down. When Carolina plays the Atlanta Falcons, the walls came down. You couldn't have the Dallas Cowboys or Houston Texans behind the cotton curtain. They couldn't play together, couldn't stay together. Walls are down. We are a new and better America. No matter how much stuff Trump puts in the game, we're a better America 50 years later. When I see a black pilot and a female pilot flying from LA to California, LA to New York, it's new. I remember when Julie, what's his name? Actually, Dan Carroll was in the TV when she had a white guy kissed. That's the news. Now I see whites and blacks in commercials lined together to get advertising something. We overcome a certain amount of race shock. We're almost shocked when the absurdities of race manifests itself again. We got a better nation 50 years later. First African American president. First African American president. Remember for that. He brought intellect and stability to the White House. All glory and no shame to the White House. A dash of hope, never despair, he brought to the White House. A lot to remember about Obama's season. And in some sense, what Trump has done, in contrast, adds more light to the legacy of Barack Obama. We wish today we had a president that was not caught up in corruption, abuse of power, name calling, and foolishness every day. We long for the day that we have a Barack with his sense of dignity and poise and cool under pressure, his demeanor. We long for that day. We don't give it, we'll get it again, but it's going to be tough.